Hi guys, welcome to Sandy on Crafts. For this video, we're going to talk about two of the most important techniques for watercolor, which is wet on wet and wet on dry. And then we are going to paint this lovely hydrangea using those two techniques. I'm talking about a project you will be able to do even if this is the very first time you're picking up a watercolor brush. So are you ready? Let's do this. My watercolor paper is Canson XL. Now, is this the best watercolor paper out there? Not at all. Is it a good beginner watercolor paper? I think so. Okay, next thing I use is this waterproof pen to draw my line art, you know, the hydrangea that we're coloring. And I was thinking that if we want to keep it really simple, we should use a brush pen because lots of watercolor kits come with one, and because that saves us all the hassle, you know, of dealing with the water pots and stuff like that. So a watercolor brush pen is a pen with a water deposit. Can you see that? There's water right there. And that means you can just, you know, press the belly when you want some water to come out, and you can also clean your brush between colors by pressing the deposit and having some water on it. You know, I don't really like using brush pens for more complicated projects, but for this one, that we're just manipulating pigment, if you will, I think it will be perfect. We'll also need a cloth or a piece of paper towel to remove the excess water. And you can also use a mixing tray. An ordinary plate will do, really, you know, any ceramic or plastic, or if your watercolor set comes in one of these boxes with a mixing tray included, even better. And speaking of watercolors, I always like to leave the best for last. So the watercolors I'm using is my Watercolor Hydrangea set, and I really love this one, but let me make this perfectly clear. You do not need a fancy watercolor set to start. You know, you don't need to waste a lot of money on a fancy set. You know, when I first started, I had this kit that was like 10 euros at the supermarket, and it worked just fine. The reason why I have this set, and it's the only one I currently own, I'm trying to pace myself here, and I really do love them, but the reason I have this set is because I actually watched a YouTube video, and she was actually trying out one set by Watercolor Hydrangea, and I just fell in love with the colors. You know, they were so vibrant and so different. Now, these are Japanese watercolors, so they are a bit different from most watercolors, so maybe that's what got me. I have no idea. So anyway, I saw them, I fell in love, I went on Amazon, they had a sale, I took that as a sign, and here we are. And by the way, I will be listing all the materials we talked about here in the description if you want to check them out on Amazon. You know, actually, I recorded the unboxing of this palette and did a little bit of swatching. You know, at the time, I was very new at all this, but I can totally make an unboxing and swatching video if you like, and maybe you'll fall in love with them just like I did. Okay, I think that's all we need, so let's talk about our two watercolor techniques. Well, there's actually three, but two are much more common, and they are called wet on wet and wet on dry, as I've told you. So the wet on wet technique is when you apply wet pigment to wet paper. Now, one thing you need to remember with watercolors is the pigment, you know, the color, always follows the water. So if you wet an entire sheet of paper and then you add some pigment, it can go pretty much anywhere because it's all wet. Now, if you draw a circle with the water and then you add the pigment, the color will stay within that wet circle. Okay, let's start pushing some water like this. Now, you don't want a pool of water in the paper, but you do want this paper to be wet enough so that it will make the desired effect. You see how easy it is to draw water from this brush though? It really is really simple. When the paper is wet and you take some activated pigment, meaning some pigment you've added water to, it makes what is called a bloom. This paper isn't the best for this technique because it dries real quickly, so if you wet an entire sheet of paper, odds are you'll have to keep wetting it to keep getting the blooms, like the ones we're making right here. Oh, there's a big one. Okay, now we're talking. Okay, so this is wet on wet, and as you can see, it's something you can try with zero watercolor experience, and that's how we will be coloring our hydrangea and our leaves. Now, the second technique is wet on dry, so the pigment is wet, but the paper is not. Now, this allows you more control over where the color goes, but it also requires you to be able to put brush to paper and paint, essentially. And that's how we'll be doing our hydrangea stalk. Still simple enough for anyone to do it, I think. Just like so. You see? No blooms, no running away of the color, just pigment on paper like so. The third technique, which we won't be using, is the dry on dry. And that's when the paper is dry and you're using very little water with your pigment. It means the color is very strong, there's loads of pigment in there, and it will also make these uneven lines. Let me see if I can show you this. Okay. You see? You know, it's a nice effect, but I don't use it that much. For some nature scenes though, it really works. Okay, here we have it, and you can get this or any other hydrangea you prefer very easily. You just go on Google, search for hydrangea line art, then you pick one, put your paper in front of your screen and just trace over it, you know, with a pencil or our waterproof pen. And that's it, you have a hydrangea to paint. We just get some washi tape or some painter's tape and we make sure our paper is nice and stuck and straight, of course. On one hand, we won't be able to move the paper around, you know, to make it easier to paint. On the other, it doesn't buckle. Now, the most expensive papers can come in blocks. You know, you have these sheets that are glued together, so you don't need to tape it down because it's already stuck. And then once you're finished, you just unglue it. You know, I'll show you how that works in future videos, but for now, this is fine. So now we pick our colors, and for me, hydrangeas are all about pinks and purples and a little bit of blues. So let me check my swatches here. Okay, and this one's called Rose Madder, so we'll go with that. This one, I think, which is cobalt violet. Yeah, cobalt violet. Here we go. Here maybe a really light blue like this one, ultramarine pale. Maybe I like this one. This is purple. I like this purple. You know, these look really dark right now, but they won't be. Trust me, they will be gorgeous. Okay, now for our leaves. Let's go. Our greens, we need a lighter one and a darker one. I like this one. This one's a little bit dry. It's olive green. I think it's one of my favorite greens, if I'm honest. But we'll also need something like this. So hooker's green. Okay. Hooker's green it is, which is this one. But I still want a little bit of rust. Maybe burnt sienna right here. Yeah, I think these will do very nicely. Okay, we are ready to start, and in watercolor you start with the lighter tones first and then you layer on the darker ones. Now for this project we won't really need any layering, so it's not important to wait for the colors to dry before adding more colors. It really is a very simple project. Let's do this. So first we start by getting this area wet. Okay, now I think we can do it. Okay, here we go. We start wetting. We're really extra careful with those little lines. If you add water outside the flower, your watercolor paint, you know, your pigment, may very well follow it. Oops, it's wet here. We do not want that. Okay, I think we're done. I think considering the paper we're using, we will be getting it wet other times. But for now, we're good to go. I think, let's see, just splat, 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 a little bit more, splat, splat again. Okay, see how the water almost does all the work for us? See, right here, it was the first place we painted, and already it's starting to dry, so no blooms, so that way we just, whoop, we just go like this, maybe a little bit down here, let's blot. You know, for me, as a student of anything really, the two most important things are to practice every single day, even if it's 5 minutes. It doesn't really matter, you know, every day you do something to get a little bit better at it. And the second thing is, personally, I always need a reward. You know, and this is our reward. We are doing something we can easily do with the amount of knowledge we just shared here, and by the end of it, we just feel accomplished. You know, we created something beautiful with what we know, and that's what motivates us to keep going. What I mean to say here is, don't shoot for the stars, okay? You will only feel frustrated. None of us wants to learn how to do something. We all want to just be able to do it perfectly. But that's just not how it works, it's a journey. Every day you learn something new and you practice it until you are ready to do more and more. Going for a very complicated project without the proper knowledge will just make you want to quit, plain and simple, because you're just not there yet. If your palette just doesn't have these many options, it's not a problem because you can mix your colors easily. For example, purple is red and blue. So all you need is your mixing tray and you start adding a little bit of each until you reach the tone you want. But for me, as a personal preference, I would rather buy beginner cheap paints, paints that have more colors available, than more expensive paints that I just have to mix every time I need something other than the basic colors. As a beginner, that can be very intimidating. Also, don't forget that each color has within it a ton of gradients. And that's the beauty of watercolors, no white required unless you want something really opaque. All you'll ever need is water. Okay, now I think we need a little bit darker. See, we go from light to dark, as we mentioned, and making sure that all that paint is still kind of wet, because instead of the blooms, you will just get dots. That's not what we want at all. It is looking so cute already. Now maybe we add a little bit of this, just to brighten up some of it, because the hydrangea leaves really do have all sorts of tones. I'm happy with this mix of colors. One flower can have all tones of different shades and pinks and purples all mixed together. That's what we were going for here, and that is, in my opinion, exactly what we got. And no, we are not shading anything, we're not thinking of where the light is coming in, which parts need to be darker than the others. That's not what we're doing here today. Today we are just adding the blooms and just filling up all this space with paint. And it is looking gorgeous. Next we have our leaves. So this would be our wet on dry, or we can do this. Oops, did too much. Okay, and the good thing about watercolors is you can always remove water and paint if you don't like something you've done. You just dab it with your paper towel, like I'm doing with this big blob of water, and you just keep going. Be careful not to touch the flower just yet, because it may not be completely dry yet. And then we will have an explosion of color. And that is not what we want right now. Let's bloom, bloom, bloom. Bloom some more, just like that. What kind of skills do you need to do this? Not many, let me tell you, but it still works. Okay, for our stock, I picked a very tiny one, totally lazy mode, I guess. We're just picking this dark green, olive green, and carefully painting over it like this. Yeah, just like that. This is wet. See, it's blooming already. Yeah, that's the issue. But what do we do when things go where we don't want them to? We dab like this. Actually, I don't really mind about the bloom. It's just, it was too much. Next, we are mixing this up right here. We are using some of these darker colors. See, they're still blooming, so this is still wet. Leaves are not meant to be one color, is all I'm saying here. Now, some parts are drier, others are older. What are we missing here? The rest. The tips are a given, we just need, oops. But then we can just splash it around like so. And then we add some rust here too. Because, we can. Just, the stalks are always a little bit darker and a little bit brownish when compared to the leaves. And we can go over if we think it's too much. We can go over with some darker paint again. Do it until you've had enough, really. The more you mix it, the better it will look. And this paper, even though it's not the best quality, it is very resistant, okay? It takes a lot to actually start, ruining the paper for it to start giving out. Okay, so now that we've allowed our flower to dry a little bit, we are adding a darker color to the center of the little hydrangea flowers. You see all these buttons right here. Now, we need to make sure that this is nice and dry, or we may just make a bloom we did not intend to make. But on the other hand, you know, it may just end up looking gorgeous. You never really know. And this one. Okay, no bloom there. And this one. This one too. Okay, this is gorgeous. Now, there really isn't that much we can do to our hydrangea, but I would dare to add a little bit of color to the background, you know, but only when the flower is dry, okay? Because if not, you know what happens? There will be color mixing all around. Remember, color follows water, so the minute that outside water touches the paint inside the hydrangea, it might just make a run for it. Okay, I think my flower is nice and dry, the leaves not so much, but we will start at the top and then come down. We go around the flower, really careful. We don't want it to explode. Okay, so for now this will do. First, because we are allowing our leaves to dry, and second, because, you know, it will probably dry before we get to paint. Let's bloom away. Now what we want is something much lighter, but you see how it gets light? You know, first it's a little bit in your face, but then it just mutes a lot. And then we just spread it out like so. We can just bring the color down. We don't need to add any more. We can even keep going a little bit around these leaves. No blooms, please. But you know, even if you do have a bloom and you happen to not like how it went, you can just dab it. I love watercolors because of it. Now, in this case, the fact that the paper dries really quickly was actually a good thing for us, because it allowed us to do this without having to stop and wait. But when you're working, you know, when you need it wet, it's not really a good thing at all. Okay guys, I think we're done here. Our hydrangea is looking lovely and bright and perfect, basically. See, we still had a little bit of buckling. See here? It's still buckled a little bit, but not anywhere near how much it would if we hadn't taped it down. Guys, hydrangea, lovely, lovely, beautiful, stunning, and we did it. Easy peasy as promised. I hope you enjoyed our time together, and please, please don't forget to let me know how your hydrangea turned out, because I would love to know. I will see you for our next video. Bye bye!